Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Rugby on Fair Sports for today's Six Nations Round 4 review. A weekend of really, really good Test rugby, actually. I think that's the biggest thing. Before we even look at results and some big performances, a weekend where we actually started to see some top-level international rugby. And I think, we haven't seen Test rugby like that in a while. And you can see why. The quality of rugby has steadily been improving since the break COVID-19. At the end of the day, it's sort of uncharted waters in terms of having such a big break, such a disjointed domestic season, such a disjointed international season, with so many different factors and issues like having to go into quarantine, not being able to train and take contact and stuff like that. So as a result, over the past few months, we haven't really seen the sort of standards of international rugby or even domestic rugby that we'd probably like to see. But this weekend, the England versus France game and Scotland versus Ireland game were two brilliant examples of just why Test rugby is the pinnacle of the game. Some fantastic performances, some fantastic results, really, really watchable. I think that's the biggest win. Rugby was the winner this weekend, which all sounds very cliched, but it really was, because we did start to see some really, really good performances. And interestingly enough, it was a weekend where stats told a very different story. We had England versus France, I thought was a very tight game, which is nice and quite sort of open. But if you look at some of the stats, for example, tackles to success rate was terrible during that game for both sides. And a lot of that was to do with the fact that they started to play a little more enterprising rugby. We saw some very nice tries being scored. Before we get into the weekend and look at the log and how it's shaping up ahead of, in theory, the final weekend, although there is a match still to catch up, please do subscribe to the channel, smash a like on the video as well. Let me know what you thought of the weekend down in the comments below. Another blockbuster weekend heading up this weekend. All the matches on Saturday. We are in for a massive day of rugby, especially if you're South African fans. Well, SA preparation series starting to heat up, so we are in for a really, really cool weekend of rugby. So make sure you smash the button and the like, subscribe to the channel so that you're up to date with everything. Right, so in terms of the weekend, it started out with Wales beating Italy 48 points to 7, and pretty much as expected, a Welsh side which looked very good, looked very lethal, and they were up. They were up quite early. It didn't take long for them to get going at all. And for Italy, it was much more of a case of sort of damage control. It's a little bit disappointing from Italy in terms of we were kind of hoping that they'll try and put up a little bit more of a fight. At the end of the day, the expectation is never that they're going to win or cause an upset, but we do want them to just try and give us something to watch, give us something to try and make a bit of a spectacle out of it. They kind of struggled to really do that. You look at the game. Look at the game. Possession was pretty even. It was 48% for Italy, 52% for Wales. That Welsh defense, though, is very, very difficult to break down, and they made 91% of their tackles and attempted 881 tackles. So they were asked to do a lot more. Italy were on the defensive front. Italy were asked to make 146 tackles at a success rate of 88, missing 17 tackles. So, defense-wise, tackles, in terms of the percentage of defense, Italy was pretty good. But at the end of the day, they just couldn't really find a way through that Welsh defense. Wales, on the other hand, didn't have too many problems with that. A bit of a messy game in terms of handling errors. I think there were like almost over 30 handling errors over the game, which wasn't great. But at the end of the day, for Wales, it was all about getting there, getting the job done. A brilliant performance by Josh Navidi, who took the man of the match. And I think for Wales, it was just a go there, get the job done. I don't think they were too worried about how they played, what the score was. They just needed to go and get a bonus point win. They did that, and now they're going to go and try and take on France for a potential Grand Slam. Who would have thought we would have been saying that at the beginning of the tournament? A halftime score was 27-0, so Italy did get a try in the second half, which was at least good there. But at the end of the day, it was a very dominant performance. Something that wasn't very dominant and could have gone either way was England versus France. What a brilliant game that was. And that was that's the Six Nations, we want to see. It was a really, really, really good game. And I thought that we finally started to sort of see the England that we kind of been waiting for the entire championship. And I think that whilst France, will sit there going, well, is that it? Have we now lost the opportunity to try and win the Six Nations? Because if they don't beat Wales comprehensively, or even if they don't get that Scottish game done, that's them out of the Six Nations contention. But we saw some very nice tries. The Anthony Watson try was superb. The Pinot try was brilliant as well. Some very nice rugby. It was just really good, watchable rugby. And England, I think the biggest reason that England won that game, 23 points to 20, was the discipline. something that has been hampering them the entire tournament. I think it took 25 minutes before they actually conceded their first penalty, and that made all the difference in the world. So if you look at some of the sort of the stats, if you're looking at the discipline, there were no cards across the game. It always helps. Penalties conceded 12 for England, 8 to France. So not phenomenal in terms. I mean, but pretty good. I mean, 12 penalties, you'll take that. Compared to I think it was like the 29 or something that they conceded out there. I mean, they've been conceding a lot of penalties. Have England? Their discipline has really been letting them down. So 12 penalties is a big improvement, especially when you think that look, there were 9 at penalties that were conceded at the breakdown, so something that they need to work on there. But 2 scrum penalties apiece, so it's pretty even. In terms of some of the other stats, the tackling was, as I say, was pretty poor. 75% tackle success rate for England, 83.7% tackle success rate for France. Possession-wise, 56% England, 44% France. Territory, 57% England, 43% France. Time in possession, 20 minutes for England, 50 minutes for France. And time in opposition, 4 minutes, 22 seconds for England, 2 minutes, 2 seconds for France. So France making a lot more of their visits to the 22. But we just saw some great tries. And it was really good to see 2 teams who are... I mean, people keep talking about them being the front runners for the World Cup. Look, I think what Wales have done in this tournament has said that, you know what? Yes, we've had a bit of luck, but we're actually still in around there. You can't just count us out like that. But these 2 sort of teams are the ones really pushing going into France 2023. And even Eddie Jones, he was saying, it's a bit of a 2-horse race in terms of who will enter that tournament as favourites, who are going to be in the best sort of shape. And I think we're going to see a very exciting sort of matchup as these 2 sides sort of try and gel together and start putting together the final touches. I think England have been settled, got a very settled side. Whereas I think France are just going to get better. They've been very, very good this tournament. Had some very good moments, and I think that they will. I do think they will only get better. I think they've got a lot of young players. I think Antoine Dupont is playing some incredible rugby, and if he keeps stepping it up like he seems to be doing consistently, then it's just going to be a brilliant side. But it was a nice game to watch. France made so many tackles. I think they made 172 tackles there, but there were a lot of missed tackles as well. 29 missed tackles by England, 28 missed tackles by France, which was quite uncharacteristic for the 2 sides. But it did make for a very watchable game, as was Scotland's 24-7 loss to Ireland. A very, very close game, with Jonathan Sexton being the one that who eventually sort of kicked the penalty towards the end of the game to clinch it for Ireland. But a very nice game. Also some good tries being scored. Also some nice rugby being played. But it's just nice and close. I think that was the main thing. They were pretty solid defensively. I mean, Scotland made 91% of their tackles. Ireland made 85% of their tackles. Both sides were asked to make a lot of tackles. 160 tackles, attempted tackles by Scotland, 176 by Ireland. Missing 13 tackles for Scotland, Ireland missing 25. But there were a lot of tackles being made. Possession 47%, Scotland 53%, Ireland. Overall territory 45% Scotland, 55% Ireland. Time in opposition 22, 3 minutes 56 seconds for Scotland, 3 minutes 23 seconds for Ireland. So pretty even. It was a very even game. And to be honest, I think had it finished 24 all, it probably would have been quite a fair reflection of the result before Jonathan Sexton kicked that penalty. But some nice moments, a very physical encounter, really sort of hard. And really, it was just that's what Test rugby is, I suppose. Is just hard graft, very close, very tight, very physical, quite a grueling encounter. I think is probably the best word. Tath Byrne was the man of the match there at Murrayfield. So as I said, so it's a very interesting weekend of rugby. And in terms of the log, that is how it currently stands over there. Right, so Wales are on top. They've got 19 points. Ireland are second with 11. France third with 10. So now remember, France still have 2 games in hand. So they can go up to 20 points if they were to beat Wales with a bonus point, and if the Scotland game went ahead and they were to beat Scotland with a bonus point. You look at that points different with Wales, 63-39 for Scotland and France. And if Wales were to lose with a losing bonus point next week, they would finish on 20. In which case, France are going to have to. I mean, look, it's all up against France at the end of the day. I think Wales probably don't even care much about the performance next week. It's going to be can they beat France? That's the question. Can they beat France? Can they go and seal a Six Nations Grand Slam? Because if they win next weekend, 5 out of 5, they're going to at least 23, 24 points, and they would have dominated the competition. And you can talk about, they had red cards, they had this, they had that. You can only beat what's in front of you, and they've been beating everyone in front of them. Ireland, after a very slow start, have claw their way back in there. Probably looking good to finish about second or third, which will be good for them. I think England are going to be quite disappointed in the fact that they are, sitting there in and around fourth. And if they were to beat Ireland next weekend, then suddenly they could potentially go into third. So that's going to be, that's why it's going to be a nice sort of weekend. It's also a setup for trying to get those final spots. Wales to beat France to take the Six Nations Grand Slam. Can England beat Ireland to try and finish third? Or England going to finish fourth? And then Scotland have got the game against Italy. So, they can also get sort of 10, 11 points. So it's a weird situation where if England were to get outplayed by Ireland, they could finish fifth. But if they were to play really well, they could get up to third. And if France and Scotland were to, suddenly just not do anything and really sort of buckle there either way. So it's a table which could do a lot of changing. We could see France coming second. We could see Scotland coming second if they were to go on and beat Italy and then France in the makeup game. So look, it's in terms of the table, it's pretty much all down to Wales. If they were to win next weekend, that's it. And I suppose it doesn't really matter after that. But it has been quite an interesting tournament. And what we've seen, and the good thing that we've seen, is improvement. And things are getting a little bit better. Maybe not the most memorable Six Nations in terms of no crowds. We did see some very nice upsets. And we did see some interesting moments. And we've seen some fantastic players. Somebody like a Louis Zammit, it's been a really like a revelation across the tournament. But the big thing was the fact that we still had the tournament. It went ahead. That's how it's looking. Let me know what you thought of the weekend below. Previews of all the games coming up this weekend. We'll be doing reviews of the game as well. We'll be live for Ireland versus England as well as France versus Wales this weekend Saturday. So make sure you tune in and come hang out with us. As always, my name is Stephen. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you very soon.